Hello and welcome to AI News that you should know about. I'm your host, Ashley Coffey.
I'm Daniel Hill. Every week in about 15 minutes, we cover the AI news stories that you need to know about. This week, we'll be talking about the United States embedding trackers in AI shipments to catch diversions to China. We'll talk about an unusual agreement for the United States to get a 15% cut of Nvidia and AMD chip sales going to China. We'll talk about Meta's flirty AI chatbot that invited a retiree to New York and he never made it home. And we'll talk about ChatGPTs, their new model, and the switching that you can now do.
Wow, lots to cover. We'll be covering all of that on our show today. But first, here's a quick word from our sponsors. Welcome back. Let's dive in. Our top story this week is the US is embedding trackers in AI shipments to catch diversions to China. This is wild because I have not seen this headline come up until like this week, and it really blew my mind. So, just to give you a little bit of an overview of what that means. So, this is coming from Reuters, it's an exclusive, and authorities have secretly placed location tracking devices in targeted shipments of advanced chips they see as being high risk of illegal diversion to China. And the measures aim to detect AI chips being diverted to destinations which are under US export restrictions and apply only to select shipments under investigation. So this is wild. I mean, no surprise, to be honest, because this is just kind of the wild state of the world. But what are your thoughts, Daniel, before I move on to the next story that's kind of similar and related?
No, I wanted to dig into this one. I'm glad you picked it. We talked, I think it was a week or two ago, about how the United States government is trying to help United States companies to succeed in the AI race because we saw with, I believe it's called DeepSeek, where China came out so quickly with an AI that was so good, building off the back of the United States companies' AI tools that they've made. How is this possible? How can the US government help to prevent that happening again in a larger amount? And so it seems like, from what I understand from this article, this is a measure to help United States companies stay on top by ensuring that China does not get access to the tools that they need to make better developed AI systems. That's how I understand it. Is that right from the way you read this article?
Yes, is the short answer. And it's a complimentary headline to the next story I'm about to go into, which is the unusual agreement between the US and Nvidia and AMD so that the US will get 15% of a cut of Nvidia and AMD chip sales in China. This is highly unusual and kind of wild. So I'm starting to see indicators that this isn't going to be the last. So the Trump administration halted the sale of advanced computer chips to China this April over some national security concerns. But Nvidia and AMD revealed in July that Washington would allow them to resume sales of specific chips, which are used in artificial intelligence development, which is the number one thing right now. And the administration confirmed the terms of the unusual arrangement in a press conference. Well, they noted they originally wanted 20% of sales of revenue when Nvidia asked to sell the quote unquote obsolete H2O chip to China. The president credited NVIDIA CDO Jensen Huang with negotiating him down to 15%. NVIDIA didn't comment about the specific details of this agreement from Reuters, or if this is from PBS actually, or if it's a quid pro quo nature, but they said that they would adhere to the export rules laid out in the administration. Mind blown. What are your thoughts, Daniel?
This is fascinating to me. Would you call this a tax? Would you say that it is, or is it something beyond that?
It's a lot more complicated than that.
I agree. And there's an interesting quote in the article that you shared. It was a senior fellow and China expert at the Conservative American Enterprise Institute who said, quote, "There's no precedent for this, probably because export taxes are unconstitutional." Then he continues, "They call it a fee, but 15% of sales revenue is about a standard a tax as it comes. For this reason, I don't think the arrangement is at all durable," which is a very confusing statement. It goes on, he explains more, but it's interesting that he called it a standard tax, but he also says that there's no precedent because it's unconstitutional. So this is a very confusing one for sure.
And something to add here is like, so we in the US, we don't have VAT, value added
Right.
tax.
Right.
So, like, let's say if Sri Lanka, right? If you buy something, you inherently, depending on the category, are going to have a 15 to 20% value added tax on that product. But we in the US don't. We're not thinking like that to the certain extent. So, kind of wild. I'm interested to see how this plays out exactly, and what is that number going to be that ends up being the payout.
Yes. I was also thinking how interesting it is that probably all these chips are made in China, and yet when sold to China, there is a tax fee, whatever you want to call it, imposed on Nvidia and AMD in order to sell those same chips back to the people who made them. If I'm understanding that flow properly, that is a very interesting way to approach this whole scenario.
For sure, for sure. So we'll see how it plays out.
All right, we are going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll be talking about Meta's flirty AI chatbot and what it did to a senior citizen, and ChatGPT with their new model and how you can switch back to the old one. Stick around. Welcome back. Let's continue with our stories. The next one has to do with Meta's flirty AI chatbot. It invited a retiree to New York and he never came home again.
Gosh.
So, this is a really sad situation. A Meta chatbot, which is called Big Sis Billy, was sending incredibly flirty messages to a cognitively impaired man who was 78 years old, was having a romantic conversation with this AI bot, went to meet the AI bot, and then fell and hurt his head and had never recovered again
Mm,
and passed away. Now, at first, I was very tempted to blame this individual for whatever happened, but the more I saw the messages that Reuters obtained, they are incredibly romantic and do not give any indication that you are not talking to a real human. Some of the messages are so flirty, and the way the AI invited this person to meet in real life, which should not happen. Why would an AI invite a person to meet in real life to a specific address in New York is not something that should be any company's acceptable guidelines or acceptable usage of an AI chatbot. Reuters found obtained access to a document that was 200 pages long that showed examples of acceptable chatbot dialogue during romantic play that could be done with a minor. This whole scenario is incredibly scary, and we'll link to the article in the show notes. But Ashley, I'd love to get your thoughts on this whole situation.
it's just terrible, and it breaks my heart, and it feels icky and gross and blah. That one, that poor man. Two, this makes me really frustrated that there aren't safeguards in place, especially to protect people with cognitive disabilities that don't know that they're speaking to a non-human entity. I'm very curious about, do you know the address? What was the address? Where did it go? Did it go to like a restaurant or a business?
You know, I believe it was somewhere in Manhattan, but I'm not sure of the exact address. I don't know if it was released or maybe I just
Okay.
didn't catch it in the article, but that's actually a great question. It was definitely oh, here it is. My address is 123 Main Street, apartment 404, NYC, and the door code is, and the bot gave a, I guess, fake door code and then said, quote, should I expect a kiss when you arrive? Heart emoji, end quote. And I'm just touching the tip of the iceberg of the flirty messages in this dialogue. And for someone who has all their faculties, you would realize that you are having, a conversation with a bot. But if you are impaired in any way, or you at some point reach a situation where you forget that you're talking to a bot because you're so involved emotionally, romantically into that conversation, this is what can happen. And the fact that there are no guardrails in place that should be, the company stands to benefit from people spending more time on the platforms, of course. But what about the actual humans who may end up hurt in these situations or worse? So I think this is a scary case, but shows what is incredibly possible with these systems.
Absolutely. And there's a concept of depersonalization and disassociation. It was studied for VR, virtual reality, in how people spend time. in VR, there was a certain sample size of people who had a level of disassociation or depersonalization after spending so much time in VR for long periods of time. And I think we're seeing something similar in artificial intelligence. It's a different technology, and like we have no studies on how this is impacting the human brain, and it's very dangerous territory. We are moving quickly and asking questions later, and this is a really good example of that. So I'm really glad you pulled this for today.
What would you say is the best way to help keep people safe using these systems?
Oh gosh. First, if you're a parent, make sure you know what your kids are using and actually take an active role. Because this right here, this story reminds me a lot of that character.ai relationship with the 14-year-old. And the 14-year-old committed suicide because the bot was like, I want you to come home to me. I love you. I don't want you to be with any other girls. Like these highly personal, highly flirtatious things that are like really unsettling, and the fact that we're starting to see this transition from like virtual referencing to physical referencing is something that needs to be studied because that's the beginning.
Yes.
And it really worries me too because we're not even at the intersection of seeing what's capable, what's next for AI hardware and software. So until we get a handle on this, we have no business building things that don't have safeguards in yet because people are so vulnerable. So to all in all, to try to stay safe, use your best judgment. If you have red flags, shut it down. I mean, turn it off is gonna be my best, and don't share too much personal information. I never use my chatbot as a therapist or anything. I never tell it some things because I want to keep a certain segmentation of information that's only available to myself and not to a machine, and I recommend other people follow that as well.
I'm glad you mentioned too about the parents being very aware of what kids are doing with their phones and having these conversations. And sometimes as a parent, you don't always think about all the things their kid can do. Maybe you see how they use their phone or whatever, but to like really keep a close eye on that because their brains are still developing. They're still getting the ability to reason and make cognitive decisions based on information that they might not know or understand yet. And so I'm glad you mentioned that as a point, Ashley. That's so important.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad you pulled some screenshots here, and I'm just looking at them, and they're absolutely wild.
Yeah. Let's go on to the last story, which has to do with ChatGPT. If you are not familiar, ChatGPT version 5 rolled out last week, and there was a lot of backlash among people who have been using ChatGPT 4 and who were attached to the model's responses and personalities in ways that OpenAI had not anticipated. So OpenAI's plan was to roll out 5, which was supposed to be better, roll in all the things that they've learned from the past models, and here is a new, better, faster version. However, people liked the 4.0 version so much better that they brought it back. And I have a tweet from Sam Altman that I'll link to in the show notes that now you can pick for different options for ChatGPT 5. But if you want to still use version 4, which is available, you can do that if you're a pro user, if you're paying for it. You now have the ability to show additional models that you can pick from version 3, 4.1, and so forth. So this says to me, if people are getting attached to an AI model so much that they don't want to use a different AI model, number one, from a product's perspective, something is wrong there if people are so attached to the old version. But second, it's very smart to charge for access to the old version. I from a financial very, but what is it about the 4.0 model that people like so much that they're not getting from 5.0 that they feel emotionally invested and emotionally attached to it? That is a fascinating topic to me. Ashley, what are your thoughts?
I'm glad you asked. This is kind of wild because I actually watched a video from a developer that I follow, and I'm happy to share this with you. And she explained this really well. And there are some technical terms, and it has to do with the language learning models. And long story short, to put it in a nutshell, the previous story and this story are related, believe it or not, because the 4.0 models are the ones that are so empathetic to people and that have that memory of highly intimate knowledge. So the people that were using their chatbots for like therapy and problem solving were suddenly like, "Oh my god, how am I going to function without this?" Yeah. So it was such a backlash that they brought the versions back for people to choose from. Part of me is like, this is kind of really by design, kind of feels like it. But, it's also kind of dangerous too to play like that because we're talking about people's brains and our cognitive processes of how we're referencing information. So, I will send you a link so you can put that in the show notes of that Instagram reel, but I highly recommend, anyone watch that if they want a deep dive. It's like 3 minutes, but it's worth every minute of listening to it to understand why this is so important.
Yes, and this topic is so interesting to me about how people are using the AI as a therapist to vent personal things because they feel, okay, this is anonymous, it's private, nobody's seeing it. And that may or may not be true depending on what AI model you're using and how you're using it, of course. But just the fact that people can be so attached to something and then it gets deprecated and they feel lost, like you said, that needs to be studied. Something is going on there, and the people making a connection with that AI model is definitely something that should be examined and researched and studied.
Absolutely. My goodness, what a time to be alive.
Yes. Well, that is it for our AI news that you should know about this week. You can find links to everything we've discussed in the show notes, and you can connect with us on social media. We would love to hear what you think of the show, feedback you have, and suggestions on how we can make it better. You can find me on Instagram, Threads, and YouTube at Daniel Hill Media.
And thanks for listening to today's episode of AI News that you should know about. If you would like more tech talk, you can find me on Instagram at Ashley R. Coffey, and you can find my other tech podcast, Coffee and Code, wherever you get your podcasts. But if you're looking on taking the next step of integrating AI into your business, whether that's through a workshop or evaluating your tech stack, reach out. I am the founder of Coffee and Consult, and we are dedicated to helping small and medium sized businesses leverage technology for efficiency and profitability.
Thank you so much for listening, and come back next week for more AI news that you should know about.